So let's start. We are going to look at climate change and public health, and I think about we'll have a number of sessions. I think we shall have close to 10 sessions um, on this topic here, that is climate and public health. And for those of you who are doing public health, this will be one of the modules that you will choose to do. So basically, next semester we shall have it amongst the elective modules. Okay, so we have different modules lined up that you can choose from. So we shall have about 5 modules, and you can choose 2. Okay, 5 elective modules, and you can choose 2. So you can decide to choose climate change and public health as one of those. You also have others like public health entrepreneurship. That's one of the other elective modules, which we shall communicate to you the other elective modules. So it is very important that you actually pay attention, because perhaps the coming semester you'll be decided to choose this. Okay, so this session is basically going to open the floor for you to see if you really pick interest in climate change and public health, and whether you can pursue that. Okay. So in this session, we'll basically should be able to understand the relationship between climate change and public health. We should be able to understand how environmental factors exacerbate health disparities, and we shall also look at adaptation and mitigation strategies that we can use to address climate-related health challenges at different levels, and then identify the key stakeholders in climate change and public health initiatives, and see how we can apply the interdisciplinary approaches to assessing health core benefits of climate action, and be able to advocate for evidence-based policies that prioritize public health. So those are the learning objectives for this session. I think from our primary level of education, you have encountered words such as climate and weather, so they are not actually new terms, but just to remind ourselves of what these terms are. When our definition of weather in those in primary was the day-to-day conditions of a given place, was the definition that we used to have. So basically, that definition still holds, because we look at weather in a short span, or what we are terming as the short-term state of the atmosphere. Okay, so today, if you ask me to describe the weather, I would say that it has been sunny, it has been cloudy, the temperatures have reached maybe, let us say, 40, things like that. So that description is basically for the conditions, the temperature, the cloudiness, whether there has been rain or not for today, okay, or maybe for the whole week, okay, the weather forecast for the whole week. thing like that. But the atmospheric conditions for a long period of time, usually in terms of decades, then that is what we call climate. Usually, there is a simple way you can remember what climate and weather is that weather helps you to make decisions that are immediate, whereas the climate helps you in making decisions that are long term. Okay, so you wake up in the morning, the decision for you to decide on what type of cloth you're going to put on, that decision, for example, will depend on the weather conditions of that day. Okay, but if you plan to have a project that will span 5 years, then you're going to look at the climatic conditions of a given area where you're going to have that project in. Okay, so we look at climate when you're making long-term decisions. We look at weather when you're making short-term decisions. So the elements of the climate, the things that really constitute the climate. We usually look at the temperature, which is the degree of hotness and coldness in the atmosphere. Of course, we measure temperature using thermometers. And then precipitation, which basically refers to the amount of water falling from the sky. This does not only refer to rain, okay, but this can also refer to snow, sleet, and then hailstorms. So when we talk about precipitation, we talk about the way water falls from the sky. It can be liquid in terms of rainwater, or it can be solid in terms of snow. And then when we talk about humidity, this refers to the atmospheric, the water content in the air, okay, or the moisture content in the air, okay. When we have higher humidity, we are basically saying that we have more water content in the air. But the more you have more water content in the air, the more the air actually feels warm. And then the other element is wind speed and direction. Okay, is an important element of the climate. Okay, the wind, of course, if you remember our definition in primary, is the moving air. Okay, measured by the wind vane. The wind vane measures the direction of the. Is it the direction? I'm actually forgetting. Okay, so that is wind. So wind is very important in climate studies, because wind, of course, we know it can cause destructions, what we call wind storms, and also wind contributes to the hurricanes and cyclones. Okay, so wind is an important element of the climate. And then we move to the atmospheric pressure, which is basically the force exerted by the weight of the air above any specific point on Earth. Okay, any object that is on the Earth's surface is experiencing a force. Okay, and that force is basically the weight of the air above it at a given particular point of the Earth's surface. And then we have what you call cloud cover. which is basically the extent to which clouds obscure the sun or the sky. Okay, and this is actually very key in determining temperature and precipitation, which we have described earlier on. Some places receive, or some places the sun is visible, whereas in others the sun is visible during certain times. Okay, so when we talk about sunshine duration, we are basically referring to the amount of time that the sun is actually visible in a particular location. This has influences on temperature and the weather patterns. Okay, some places actually can take longer periods without them seeing the sun. Okay, so those different elements can be actually depicted in this illustration here, which shows the climate system. Okay, the sun is the major source of energy for the earth. Okay, so the radiations from the sun power life on earth. Without the sun, plants cannot make food through photosynthesis, and yet actually humans also depend on plants for food. So also the same thing to the water bodies. The aquatic animals in water bodies also depend on other aquatic animals for food, that is through predation, but also we have what we call aquatic plants. These aquatic plants also depend on sun rays to make their own food. Okay, so you really see that the sun is very, very important. So the rays from the sun carry energy that is absorbed by the earth's surface, that also reflects part of these rays. So you can see these rays that come from the sun, and then the different components, that is the land, and then the water bodies absorb some of this heat, and part of this heat is actually also reflected back to the atmosphere. Whether the surface is a water body, whether it is land, whether it is mountainous, whether it is in the polar areas where we have what we call the glaciers, all these still exchange energy. Okay, there is exchange of energy. Okay, the energy that comes, part of it is absorbed, part of it is reflected. So within the atmosphere we have different gases that play an important role in absorbing some of the radiations that are reflected. Okay, we shall look at these gases, and we actually term them as greenhouse gases. Okay, carbon dioxide, nitrogen oxide, methane, and many others. Okay, so some of these actually hold up the rays that are reflected from the Earth's surface. Okay, so this diagram, apart from showing us the different surfaces, we have different parts that we can talk about. The space above the Earth's surface here, you can see it is called the atmosphere. And then on Earth, where we have living organisms, that space is what we call the biosphere. And then the water bodies that I've talked about, they can be rivers, they can be lakes, oceans, they are called the hydrosphere. And then what is not depicted here is the stratosphere and then the troposphere. Those are the two that are not depicted in this diagram. But these are also important spaces. We start with the troposphere and then you go to the stratosphere. We shall look at that later on when we look at the greenhouse effect and how it relates to climate change. Okay? So in here, of course, we have different mechanisms that are happening. We have issues to do with precipitation, that is the form, the waterfall mechanisms. It can be rainwater, it can be the snow. Okay. We also have evaporation. Okay. When through the sun rays, water moves into the atmosphere through the process of evaporation. Another process which is similar to evaporation is what we call transpiration, where plants lose water into the atmosphere. So these different mechanisms, the transpiration, evaporation, precipitation, all these in one way or the other can be influenced by human activities. And that's why we have this here. Okay, activities to do with, for example, deforestation, which is the cutting down of trees. The impact of this is that you're basically cutting or limiting transpiration, yet transpiration helps in rain formation. Okay. The other thing is deforestation also results into you're basically reducing the uptake of carbon dioxide, because the plants or the trees take up carbon dioxide during the process of photosynthesis. So when you reduce forest cover, you're basically reducing what we call carbon dioxide sink. Okay, carbon dioxide sink. Forests act as carbon dioxide sinks because of the fact that they absorb the carbon dioxide. Okay, so human influences have important impact on the climate. Okay, so you can see here, you see the roads, the transportation, whether it is trains, whether it is cars, emits some of the gases that you see up here. Construction of homes also results into some of the gases that we have up there. And then in our factories, you can see the smoke that also contributes to some of the gases that we have up there. Okay. So those are some of the things that really are very, very important in understanding climate issues. So now when we talk about climate change, we are basically referring to long-term changes that occur in the Earth's climate. And these relate to the climatic elements that we talked about. The rise in temperature, the changing patterns and distribution of precipitation, the patterns of winds, and all these long-term changes in the Earth's climate are mainly caused by human activities, such as burning fossil fuels and deforestation. Okay, so we shall look at that later on and see how man-made activities contribute to climate change. So how does this happen? The Earth, as we have seen in the other diagram, we see that there is an interchange, or there is exchange of energy. Okay, we started with talking about the energy that comes from the sun rays that is absorbed by the different surfaces on Earth, whether it is the water bodies, whether it is land, whether it is by plants. Okay, so when we talk about climate change, we are basically saying that there is an imbalance between the energy that is coming from the sun, which is the solar or shortwave radiations, and those that is actually reflected back into the space. So the one that is reflected back into the space are the ones we call the infrared radiations, or the long wave radiations. So the ones that are actually supposed to escape into the space are trapped. Okay, they are trapped by the gases that we talked about, the greenhouse gases. So you don't have a way for these radiations to actually escape. So you have an imbalance. You have more rays coming, but those that are supposed to be creating space to live are not living. So they trap more energy. And this is basically illustrated with what we call the greenhouse effect, which is that the radiations from the sun, which we call the solar radiations, they're the ones that are the drivers of the climatic system. When these rays reach the surface, they can be absorbed and also be reflected. But what happens is that those that are reflected, which we said are actually long wavelength radiation, are trapped in the atmosphere by the gases that we talked about. And this causes the Earth's surface to warm up. And this is basically the global warming aspect, which basically characterizes the climate change issues that we have. Okay, so these outgoing or these reflected rays are prevented from escaping back into the space by these greenhouse gases. So they trap these gases that eventually cause the Earth to warm up. And this greenhouse effect is actually also applicable in agriculture, where crops can be grown in a glass-like structure, such that the rays are actually trapped to create that high temperature that may be needed by certain plants. Okay, so that's the greenhouse effect. So the greenhouse gases that are very problematic, that absorb or trap these radiations and cause the Earth to be warm or warmer, include carbon dioxide, which is the most common one, and it is the one that is actually very problematic, one of the troublesome gases. But of course, like we have seen, that carbon dioxide is actually also still needed. It is troublesome, but still needed by plants for photosynthesis. Okay, so this carbon dioxide basically comes from burning fossil fuels such as coal, oil, and natural gas for energy purposes. Okay, the energy that powers factories, the energy that powers our transportation, whether it is vehicles, whether it is the train, whether it is the railway, the cooking at home, the natural gas, all these come from fossil fuels. Okay, and now um, the other issue that causes the increase in carbon dioxide is deforestation, like we have talked about. If you cut down trees, it means you're removing the carbon dioxide sink. The other gas is methane. Those of you who studied organic chemistry, methane is an alkane. So it is emitted from the production and transportation of coal, oils, and natural gas. But we can also point out that methane can also be produced as one of the products of the decay of organic waste. Okay, and for example, where we have what we call landfills, the places where the different cities place their wastes, and the ones we call the landfills. Okay, so methane comes from solid wastes that are actually decaying and releasing that gas that we call methane. It is one amongst the gases that can trap the reflected rays from the earth. Nitrous oxide is also another one. It also comes from agriculture and industrial activities. And then we have fluorinated gases, the hydrofluorocarbons, the perfluorocarbons, sulfur hexafluoride, nitrogen trifluoride. These are also gases that trap reflected rays from the Earth's surface. So these emissions, all these gases actually come from different sources. We have seen that it comes from the transportation, from agriculture, from the landfills, from the unmanned activities like construction, burning fossil fuels, especially from industries. Okay, so all these examples come from different sectors. The infrastructure, or what you can call the infrastructure sector. This is to do with either major constructions. Okay, that is the infrastructure sector. Road constructions, building factories and things like that. That is the infrastructure sector. And then we have the transportation sector. We have the agricultural sector. And now we basically don't need to forget the health sector. So the health sector itself also produces some of these gases. And we can look at this in 3 ways. Okay? Scope 1, which is basically a direct It involves the direct activities of the healthcare organizations that contribute to production of these gases. Okay, so you have a hospital. That hospital has ambulances. The fuel in those ambulances, basically the oil, whether it is diesel, whether it is petrol, and the different oils. When this car is being used, it emits carbon dioxide. Okay, so that carbon dioxide contributes to the emissions that we have. So you can imagine how many cars are owned by different hospitals in the country, and what fuel do they use? Is it renewable fuel or is it non-renewable fuel? Okay, and then we have the wastes at the hospital. These wastes usually disposed through burning. Okay, incinerated. Incineration itself produces also carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and other gases, by the way. Okay, that is scope 1. So the activities of the healthcare organization can contribute to emissions that contribute to climate change. And then you have scope 2, which are related to the kind of energy that the hospital uses to run its operations. Okay, is that energy, is it, of course, the hospital is the one, sometimes it is not the hospital that is producing that energy. So it is procuring it from another party. Okay, so for example, Juba Teaching Hospital, let us say, is using what we call here city power. That city power comes from generators. Those generators are emitting emissions. So it is indirect. Okay, the activities of the healthcare organization run on fuel that is coming from non-renewable source. And then scope 3 is you are using gloves, you're using sanitizers, you're using stethoscopes, all the different medical products that you're using. But the process of producing these medical products involves emission of greenhouse gases. Okay, so that is scope 3. And then sometimes we forget to look at the travels that people make. If someone gets an emergency, as in, and is, let us say, in a wheel and needs to be referred to Juba, most cases they will have to use a plane. That plane also emits emissions that contribute to gases into the atmosphere. So you see that even within the health sector, we are contributing to climate change because of the different gases that are produced at different levels of the operations. Okay? So when you have a lot of these gases, they trap the reflected gases, the reflected energy, and then cause the earth to be more warmer. So this is actually increasing. This is increasing for all the other generations from industrial era up to the era that we are in now. The amount of these gases has been increasing. And consequently, the temperatures have been rising over the years. You can see from the 1850s to 2000s where we are. And the projection to the coming decades is actually alarming. Okay, so if you look at this graph, it depicts the temperature increase in terms of the average temperature in degrees centigrade of the Earth's surface. So an average increase of, let us say, even 1 degree centigrade, that is too big. It's too big. Okay, so the Earth's surface is becoming warmer, and we are having what we call global warming, and we are experiencing episodes of what we call heat waves, which are basically adverse among the adverse weather events. So when we have the climate behaving in such a way where we have rising temperatures, you're going to have a lot of problems. One is that you have heat waves. In East Africa, I've not heard of heat waves since I became consciously aware of the things happening around. But now, what we are experiencing is now a reality. Okay, I think ever since South Sudan became independent, we have not had situations where they close schools because of heat waves. Okay, now it is coming closer. So some of these things are things that you hear about in faraway countries. Australia, where they even have what we call wildfires. But now these things are coming closer and closer. So when we have the temperatures rising, you have episodes of heat waves. Okay, when we have these heat waves, you have warmer air, and remember that when you have warm air, you have more moisture in that air, and then therefore if it means that it rains, the rain becomes heavy. So we have heavy rainfalls, and this is where now you get the floods. I think one of the longest, the floods that were devastating happened, I think, between 2019 and 2020 in South Sudan, where even Juba itself experienced some of the flooding. Okay, so that is what happens when you have warm air. It holds up more moisture, and when it comes time for rain, the rains are heavy and they cause destructions, and eventually flooding happens. And when you have flooding happening, you have water bodies being contaminated, infrastructure and the sanitary facilities especially become washed away, and then you have outbreak of waterborne diseases, cholera, things like that. In other areas, you have prolonged droughts. Okay, prolonged droughts because of the increasing evaporation rates, and then the plants will not actually grow well, and you have famine setting in. Okay, so we have famine setting in, that is basically food insecurity, and then you have people becoming malnourished, malnutrition coming in, and then malnutrition comes with its own effects also, that it increases the risk of you getting infectious conditions. So it is one thing that leads to the other, and you have different pathways through which the health of individuals is actually impacted. We talked about the cyclones earlier on, and hurricanes. These are adverse weather events that can destroy communities that stay closer to water bodies or coastal communities. Okay, we've had what we call Hurricane Katrina. Okay, we've had the extreme weather events that cause immediate injuries and destruction of property. Okay, they're characterized by strong winds and heavy rainfall. Also, there was one in Japan which was very serious. It rained and rained, and people's houses, people were being rescued using helicopters. Okay, so those are tropical cyclones. They increase in intensity when we have the climate deteriorating, when we have climate change. So this is a picture where the storms, okay, coming or building up from water bodies, and then the communities on the coastal margins of these water bodies are the ones that actually suffer. So these strong winds can destroy plants and also infrastructure. I don't know who is having their mic open. Please make sure you mute. Make sure you mute so that we don't have that noise from you. And then the other issue is what we call the rising sea level. So the water levels in some of the water bodies is actually increasing. Why is it increasing? It's because the temperatures are rising. We have melting of the ice, and then the melting of course gives you water. So you see the water bodies rising. And then the image that you see there is for what we call the glaciers we talked about earlier on. Okay? When snow falls, of course in cold environments, it basically freezes and form what I can term as those ice blocks that you see. Okay. But with the time, these glaciers actually can melt. They melt, and then the water goes through the water body, and that contributes to the rise in the sea level. Okay. So this is what you still see them here. You have large bodies of ice that are slowly moving over land. Okay, they form snow. They form when snow accumulates for many years. So don't think that these are formed the short periods. They actually formed after many years. Okay, so if the temperatures are still low, they keep accumulating. Okay, and then they become ice. And we are saying that as they accumulate, the weight of course increases, and then eventually the ice it can melt downwards. It can melt and also move downwards because of the force of gravity into water, the water bodies. Let me first check was the person with that mic open. Luala, I'm going to mute you, but please, if I mute you, don't unmute. Okay? I was saying that Lometa, I have a question. You raised up your hand.
Yeah, thank you. It's not really a question. And then I'll try to remind you to actually ask Mr. Lowell to mute his mic because it's causing a little bit of disturbance behind the background. Otherwise, that was why I raised up my hand. Thank you.
Okay. I have muted him. I hope he doesn't open his mic again. So I need to put this into slideshow again. Okay. So we have emphasized the fact that climate change is because of human activities. And eventually, as we shall see in the subsequent slides, that climate change greatly influences human health. And before we basically go to those areas, how climate change influences human health, we can look at the different pathways. When you talk about pathways, we are referring to how do things really happen? How do things really happen? And as you can see from this diagram, the way things happen is not linear. It's not linear. It's not that you're going to start from point A to B, from B to C. No, you can start from A and then you go to D, and then you come back to C, and then you come to Z. So that is the relationship that we have with the climate change concepts. So the human activities that contribute to climate change, we have already listed them. We said that man is involved in deforestation, is involved in fossil fuel, burning fossil fuel through the different sectors. Some of these activities, for example, deforestation, results into land degradation. When you cut down the trees, your soil is exposed to rainwater, and you have soil erosion. When you have soil erosion, you're losing fertile soils. When you don't have fertile soils, you will not have increased crop productivity. So you can see from this side, land degradation through deforestation, and then you have reduced agro productivity. Okay, or you can talk about activities such as the use of excessive fertilizers or pesticides. This will also eventually degrade the soils and you have low productivity. If you have low productivity, then you have food insecurity issues. If you have food insecurity issues, you have malnutrition. When you have malnutrition, now increase the risk for getting communicable diseases or infectious diseases. So that's where we come back to human health. Now we come to the other surface that we talked about, the stratosphere. This surface is very important because it has what we call ozone. The ozone layer. The ozone layer is being depleted. Ozone layer depletion. When the ozone layer is depleted, it means it does not trap sufficient rays that come from the sun. Okay, so you will have these rays in a way hitting direct on humans without some of it being trapped, and that causes direct health impact. That's why we have this straight line here. And then the depletion of the stratosphere, ozone layer, also happens because of climate change, but also contributes to climate change. That's why you have two arrows. That climate change causes the depletion of the ozone layer, okay? But the depletion of ozone layer also contributes to climate change. Now, climate change in itself has very many ways in which it affects human health. Okay, so you have the direct ways and the indirect ways that we shall see later on. And then we come to biodiversity. We have species that are actually getting extinction. Okay, and we have those that are actually on the verge of extinction. So we are losing what we call biodiversity. Okay, these actually, the different species play an important role in the ecosystem. Okay, so if we have them being extinct, then you're going to have problems associated with the different roles that they actually do in the ecosystem. And of course, you need to remember that humans are also part of the ecosystem. Okay, so these different organisms act as, to man, they can be goods, or we can say they perform certain services. Okay, and if they decline, then this will actually impact human health. And then the freshwater decline. We talked about the aquatic life, the organisms that are in water bodies. It can be the fish, it can be the plants, aquatic plants. All these are also affected by climate change, either directly. That's why we have this arrow here. Okay, and therefore also their presence of edible freshwater animals or absence actually contributes to human health, and this is where you see here. Okay, so water bodies, the biodiversity in water bodies is very important for human health. Okay, and on the other hand, the fresh water also is what humans depend on. Okay, for domestic, industrial, domestic and industrial activities. Okay, lack of access to water is actually one of the biggest problems that developing countries have. This is also contributed by the decline in fresh waters. So access to quality, to safe water in enough quantity is a challenge. Obviously, like we shall see later on, when you have no or limited access to these resources, you will have a conflict. And this one does not, we don't need to look for the answer very far. The communal fighting that is taking place in different parts of the country, it contributed one of the major factors to do with pasture and water. The pastoral communities, or the communities that rear cattle, that's the main problem they face. So when the pasture become limited, then that's when you have cattle-related conflicts, and this obviously result into injuries and death, abduction and things, displacement, and a lot of things. Okay, so you can see how climate change is related to the water bodies. You remember the conversations about the Suez Canal, the dredging or no dredging issues. Climate change matters. It's also an issue to do with biodiversity. The impact of the dredging, what will it do, or what will it have on biodiversity? Okay, and many other dimensions that can be taken. From this, we basically learn that you have different pathways through which climate change actually affects everyone. Okay, everyone. No one is actually safe with climate change issues. So I earlier on said that climate change can impact health through direct and indirect mechanisms, and this is the illustration. So the major weather events that can cause direct health impact, for example, heat waves, okay, they constitute what we call mortalities: heat stroke, heat exhaustion. Okay, these are direct health impacts caused by heat waves. Okay, the cyclones, the hurricanes, all these cause injuries and destruction of property. They can also result into mental disorders directly. Okay, so that is the direct route. And then in here you see microbial contamination pathways, transmission dynamics, agroecosystems, hydrology, and then the economic, socio-economic demographics, socio-economics, and then the demographics. These are now the different pathways that the different indirect pathways that climate change can impact on health. Okay, microbial contamination pathways, transmission dynamics, agroecosystems, hydrology, and socio-economic and demographic factors. And let me talk briefly about them, and then you'll see how these actually contribute to these health effects that we have. We already talked about extreme weather events that cause mental breakdown. Okay, now actually this is an issue that we have not actually addressed as a country. You remember when there was lockdown and then schools were locked, schools were stopped from operating. We had a number of other problems that happened. One of those problems was increased cases of gender-based violence. The other problem was increased cases of teenage pregnancies. Okay, and this is a known fact that the more you keep a child in school, the longer they will take to get the first pregnancy. Now we have closed the schools and we have not looked at those social issues that will arise out of school closures. Okay? So some of these children will engage in antisocial behaviors, will engage in activities like smoking, shisha, and things like that. It is also likely that others will not actually turn up when the schools actually later on open. Okay? So you can see that a heat wave incident is contributing to all these other problems. School dropout, teenage pregnancies, increased cases of gender-based violence, engaging in antisocial behaviors, and others. But to the extent to which the different people in the different communities will actually be affected by the school closures will depend on socio-economic factors. Okay? So if you have a family that can afford to have what you call a private teacher, then that means that even if the public schools or the schools are closed, the child will continue to study even when the schools have been closed. So there is a protective mechanism. So that means that school closures do not affect all people in the same manner. So people will be affected differently. Okay? So that is where the socio-economic pathways come in. Those who are poor will be affected more, and then those who are having higher income can actually adapt and be more resilient. Okay, and then changes in the rain patterns will affect food production. Okay, so agroecosystems and hydrology, these are related to practices in agriculture, and the rainfall patterns contribute to food and water shortages. Okay, how do we use water, by the way? How do we use water? Are we using water in a sustainable way? Are we even harvesting water? Or what is sustainable water management? Okay, in your own organization, whether it is a hospital, we actually saw earlier on that a hospital can contribute to climate change, and we saw the different mechanisms. But one of the things that you need to look around is, how is the hospital using the water? Okay, what is the water, the nature of the water systems that are being used by the hospital? Are you reusing the water or you are not reusing the water? How are you treating the water? And things like that. So that is to do with water. And then the more we have extreme changes in the weather or climatic conditions, the more likely that we'll have different vectors having more areas to actually breed from than before. Okay, so that means that you can even have certain vectors inhabiting certain places where they were not available before. Okay, so that is transmission dynamics, creation of new habitats. Okay, and also for example, in the country we have what we call the peak malaria season. You will find out that we no longer have a peak malaria season because throughout the whole year we'll have malaria cases being very high. Okay, these are part of the things that actually explain some of these issues. And then when you have, let us say, flooding, when you have destructive activities happening, you will have water bodies being contaminated. Okay, and then you have all these waterborne diseases. So those are the microbial contamination pathways. Okay, so having understood that, the subsequent slides will be very simple. When you have heat waves, when you have hurricanes, you will have people dying because of these events. Okay, people will be displaced. You have people who will be worried. Mental issues will come in, and then we have what we call heat-related illnesses: heat stroke and heat exhaustion. In countries such as, I think, Australia had one of the longest bushfires. I think it happened, I think, about 4 or 3 years ago. A wildfire that takes weeks and weeks for it to stop. And this happened because of extreme temperatures. Okay, when the temperatures increase, the quality of air becomes worse, and then cases of respiratory illnesses like asthma and the other lung diseases actually become very common, and it becomes worse with urban areas. Okay, and then you also have issues to do with the diseases or the vectors having more areas to bleed from, and then causing these diseases. So the mosquitoes, the ticks, now actually increase, okay, increase vector-borne diseases like malaria, dengue fever, and Lyme disease. We have already looked at that. And then if we have changes in the rain or precipitation patterns, then you will have changes in the ecosystems, okay, whether it is aquatic or land ecosystems. You have destruction of habitats, and this forces these animals to move to new areas. And when they move to new areas, they come closer to humans, and then you have a risk of transmission of diseases from animals to humans. And this is where now One Health approach comes in, and we shall have a session on climate change and One Health. You cannot address the problem of One Health, or the problem of climate change, without involving other professionals. Environment, animals, and humans become very key. Okay, so in terms of agriculture, food shortage, malnutrition, and then increase the risk for infectious diseases. We have what we call climate refugees. people who move from their area because of extreme weather events, they may become climate refugees. They look for places which are a bit safer for them to stay in, and also look for better economic activities. So you can see from there that it is the impact of climate change is not only on health, it also has economic impact. Okay? It has economic impact. Okay, we have already talked about how climate change affects mental health. Okay, so imagine you are in the field, it rains in Juba, and no one is in your house. Your house gets flooded, all your things get damaged, your electronics, your items in the house, you had money in the house, the rain has done the mess. Okay, so you get depression, you get depressed. Okay, you become very anxious. You're asking yourself, when will I go back and check my things? Okay, so eco anxiety is also another issue that different people are experiencing. But also, if you have seen people go through life-threatening events, or even deaths, people dying because of, let us say, extreme rain, this creates issues to do with post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay, so that is how climate change causes mental health issues. So in summary, climate change is a very big problem, and it is actually causing deaths. People are dying because of climate change. And WHO reports that 250,000 additional deaths will happen between 2030 and 2050 from malnutrition, malaria, diarrhea, and heat stress. And these are things that are actually with us. When we talk about malaria, it is not alien. When we talk about malnutrition, it is not alien. When we talk about the heat, it is not alien. So how prepared are we as a country? It's a question that all of us needs to look at. We need to look at that. So remember, I hinted on the fact that the consequences of climate change are not only on health, but they also affect the economy. Okay, and here, if the globe is really to improve the resilience of health systems to match with the climate change issues, then it means that we need to spend between 2 to 4 billion annually until 2030. Okay, so that has not taken into consideration other sectoral activities that will need to take place to address the issue of climate change. Okay, remember the other sectors: transportation, agriculture, built environments. How are we building our cities, by the way? How are we building our cities? You go to Awil, you go to Malacca, you come to Juba here. How are we building them? Okay. Not long ago, it's I think less than a week, we had 2 pedestrian stations burning down. There was one, I think one was in Wow, and then another one was in Juba, in 2 weeks. Okay, in 2 weeks. So that poses a question on how are we building our cities. These days we are actually countries are talking about what we call, they can use the word smart cities, and the word smart cities does not refer to being clean. As I know some of you, if I ask you in the examination, explain what a smart city is, you tell me a smart city is one which is clean. That's not it. Okay? We talk about smart cities, we also talk about eco cities. So what cities are we actually building in the country? It's another issue. So earlier on, I hinted on the fact that you will have conflicts emerging out of climate change. And I said that, for example, the cattle rearing communities in South Sudan have been having what you call intercommunal fighting or cattle raiding issues. These are usually precipitated by lack of enough pasture and water. Okay? But if you dig deeper, you see that the lack of pasture and the enough fresh water, the consequence are as a result of climate change issues. So this is an illustration for you on how things really happen. Okay? So if people don't have enough, we call that scarcity. This scarcity can be brought by either someone deciding not to give you, or by when someone creates what we call, basically what I've described is what we call artificial scarcity. I have sugar in my shop, but I don't want to sell it because I want to create an impression that there is scarcity of sugar so that I can sell it at a high price. Okay? So I don't supply you. Supply induced scarcity. Okay? You can call it man-made scarcity. And then you have demand induced scarcity. Okay, there is scarcity because a lot of people actually need it. And then there is structural scarcity. You can look at it in terms of either infrastructure issues, either policy issues that are creating this scarcity. Okay? So for example, you have a community that needs wheat, and the wheat is imported from Sudan. And let us say there is no cooperation between the two countries. So you will not have the wheat for the people, yet they actually need it. So that looks more of a structural point. Or the bridge is broken, that is a structural issue. Overall, you will have scarcity. Now, when you have scarcity, people will move, migration. Okay? Or when you have scarcity, people will be chased, expulsion, force people to move. So you have two communities that have been grazing together, but the pasture is becoming less, so let us chase them to go to their land. That is expulsion. Okay? Now, these ones now are basically we are at the level of the social effects of this scarcity. If this is not handled well, you will have an insurrection. When people raise up in arms to defend themselves, so you have an insurgency. Okay? Or you will have a coup d'etat, change of government by use of force. Or you have group identity conflicts. Bashir's government, I think, if I'm to remember well, the overthrow of that government was because of bread, scarcity of bread. Okay, so if you are to look at how did Sudan reach an extent of having scarcity of bread, then you somewhere you will come across climate change. You will realize that there was a drought, and that drought can be attributed to climate change. Okay, so you eventually have violent conflicts arising from climate change issues. So earlier on, I said that communities will not be affected by extreme climatic events in the same way. Different people, different communities will be affected differently. And this is where I can bring the term disproportionately, that usually the poor people are affected disproportionately compared to people of in the higher income earning class. So that brings us to the concept of vulnerability. If, for example, the heat that we are having in Juba or in South Sudan, how many offices are having AC? How many offices or homes can afford ACs? We have offices that don't have ACs and they rely on fans, and you have also offices that may not afford even the fan. Okay, but they have to work. So we have homes that cannot afford ACs, and then we have homes that can afford ACs. So the way a home that has AC is affected by the increasing temperatures is different from a home that does not have what? AC. So that is basically a concept of vulnerability. The extent to which you actually suffer the consequences of the negative impact of climate-related hazards. That is what we call vulnerability. The extent to which a population is susceptible to adverse effects of the climate change. And this one depends on different factors. Another concept that we can look at is sensitivity to climate change. How a particular outcome is affected by a change in climate conditions. Okay? If, for example, let us look at particular diseases. Malaria, which is a vector-borne disease. Changes in the climate will easily change the patterns of malaria in a given community. So we have certain conditions that are very sensitive to climate change, in that when there is change in the climate, you also see a change in the pattern of those conditions. Okay, heat-related conditions, respiratory conditions, these are very sensitive to climatic changes that can happen. So that is what we call sensitivity to climate change. And then we have adaptive capacity. The ability of a population to adjust to a new or changing climatic condition in order to reduce vulnerability and cope up with the impact of the climate change. Okay? adaptive capacity. I've given two examples that relate to this. The schools have been closed, but we have countries that have these temperatures almost annually, reaching 40 and 39, the rest, but they continue to study. What do? Is that they develop what we call adaptive capacity. So what do these countries do? Okay, these countries, what they do is that they move the time for lessons to night time. So the kids go to school at night, so they study during the night. And for you to study during the night, of course, you need to have security and you need to have transport. Okay, you pick these kids from their homes and you drop them to their homes when they're done with studies. So that shifting of classes from during day to evening and the early hours of the night is an adaptive ability. Okay, how do you adjust to cope up with the vulnerability caused by the climate change? So in our context, it's a lot of things that we really need to do. Of course, you cannot adapt to the shifting of the classes to evening hours in our context, because one, of course, we don't have enough resources. We need the buses, we need the roads, we need security, a number of things. Okay. So there are many issues that need to be changed, whether it is to do with the infrastructure, whether it is to do with the healthcare system, whether it is to do with supporting communities to adopt strategies that allow them to adapt to climate change. So, what are the things that make you more vulnerable to climate change issues? If the population is too high, then it means that of course, high population causes what we call pressure on the environment. Okay, and also this can result actually into climate-related risks. So if you live in a densely populated area, if you experience climate-related exposures, you are more likely to be more vulnerable. And then I've explained the money part, economic issues. Okay. The other adaptive strategy that you can think of, apart from shifting the night to the studies to night time, you can say all the schools that are owned by the government are going to have ACs. But you cannot have that if you don't have electricity. You get it? So you can have ACs installed in each of the classes if you are economically well. Okay, so the level of economic development impacts on vulnerability. Access to food. Okay, we already talked about food insecurity, then malnutrition, and then infectious diseases. Okay, this is also related to economic status. Okay, having enough food is associated with having sufficient income. So income is very important. One of the things that this session should teach you is that without having sufficient financial resources, you are bound to suffer more with climate change. And the examples are actually very many. The options that we think about We cannot think about, we cannot implement them because we don't have money. The buses, we don't have money. Studying online, we don't have money. Having ACs, we don't have money. You get it? So money is very, very important. It protects you from being vulnerable. And then local environmental conditions. People who stay in areas that are prone to these environmental risks will have a lot of these issues. And then people who have pre-existing conditions, okay, will also suffer the consequences. And then another session that we shall talk about in one of our sessions is to look at climate change and the healthcare system. The only aspect that we have looked at is how the healthcare system or the healthcare sector contributes to the increment in the amount of greenhouse gases. But we have a lot of things to discuss to do with climate change and the healthcare system. Okay? How do we have a strong healthcare sector that can respond to climate change? We have a number of issues there: awareness, surveillance issues, policy, leadership, a lot of those concepts. We shall have them in that discussion. But if you have a country that does not have organized the health system, it even becomes very hard to handle very mild weather events. For example, when you have a flood happening, what is the capacity of the health system to respond to the health needs of these communities that are faced with floods? Okay, so strengthening the health system is very key. So having looked at all those dynamics about vulnerability, who are those people that are highly vulnerable? The answers are very obvious. And one, children. The children are prone to illnesses caused by extreme environmental and weather events because they have an immunity that is still developing. Okay, so they are prone to these conditions. The elderly, they already have other conditions, pre-existing conditions, and then you expose them to this heat, it becomes very problematic. So they easily become dehydrated, heat stress, and cardiovascular conditions. They usually have them, and they are exacerbated. Countries that are poor, okay, when you don't have piped water, when you still rely on what you call open water sources, when you don't have adequate sanitary facilities, when people still sleep in the same housing with the animals, no adequate housing, even in Juba, okay? A housing, how is a 21st century house supposed to look like? Very few people have adequate housing, okay? The rukubas are becoming rukubas even for people who are earning in dollars, okay? So just like what we say, that people who are poor are affected more. It's the same thing with countries which are poor are affected more. So low-income countries or developing countries or low-income communities, they suffer, they're vulnerable. Okay? What this teaches us is what we call climate justice. That you see, we should know in our minds that the poorest of the community members will be the ones that are going to be affected more. So if we are to address the issues to do with climate change, then we should always think about them. And that is climate justice. It's also related to environmental justice, environmental health justice. that the people who are staying in the polluted areas are the poorest, and these polluted areas are being polluted by the rich. It's the same thing with climate change justice. That actually the carbon dioxide that is contributing to climate change is coming a lot from the rich countries, and it is the poor countries which are actually suffering more. So climate change issues create and exacerbate health inequities, meaning that the impact disproportionately is more on the poor or marginalized communities. So one of the issues with climate change is that it is not straightforward, that it is not like other concepts that are straightforward, where you say, let us say, Anopheles mosquito, uninfected female Anopheles mosquito carries the Plasmodium species that causes malaria. That is straightforward. It is A, B, C, D. With climate change, it is not like that. Climate change involves issues of predicting what will happen in 2030, what will happen in 2050. How do you make those predictions? Those predictions are made using what we call climate models. These are basically computer programs that are fed with information and can simulate the Earth system, of course considering the oceans, atmosphere, land surface, the cryosphere, and other dynamics, and all those elements, and say, this is what we shall see. Okay? This is what we shall see, what we call climate projections. So these climate projections are often not very exact. They are predictive because of different reasons. Science in itself may not be certain. Okay? The science, what we can call climate science, still is a field that has that level of uncertainty. We also have societal choices or factors that make it very hard to predict the environment. Okay? And then natural viability. These are natural things. You cannot predict for sure that tomorrow at 4 it will rain. No, it is a natural event. You cannot exactly predict that. Okay, so because of these issues, we have what we call climate change skeptics. Skeptics. These are people who say that this issue of climate change does not exist. Yet there is overwhelming evidence to show that actually climate change is here and it needs to be addressed. People like Donald Trump, the former US president, is a climate change skeptic. Okay? Actually, when he is elected as the president, you will see that the US will reduce funding in that area. Okay, when he becomes president, of course, the election I think will take place. Is it this year? 2024, right? November? Okay, so when the election takes place, you will see US taking a different direction because of the executive powers of the president. So what needs to be done for these climate change issues? We have two categories of strategies that can be undertaken. We call them mitigation strategies and adaptation strategies. With mitigation, the aim is to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases that are being produced. With adaptation, it's about reducing the impact of global health, of climate change on health. So how do we manage to stay with the climate change impact such that the impact is minimal and not big? That is what we call adaptation strategies. So we have the two approaches, okay, and we shall look at all of them in another session where we shall look at the different policy areas that can be taken to improve, to mitigate, and also in adaptation to climate change. Okay, so mitigation is to make sure that we limit the production of greenhouse gases. So this can be through making sure that we use renewable energy in different sectors. Okay, whether it is in transportation, whether it is in agriculture. And if you are building cities, we build sustainable cities, eco cities. Okay, that's what can be done. The more you have population growth, the more you are going to have negative impact on the climate. So reducing population growth, it becomes very key. Building sustainable cities can involve or building what you can call eco-friendly cities can involve making sure that you have pedestrian lanes, people moving. It is encouraged that you don't move with your car. Okay, moving with your car to the workplace. Of course, the car emits fumes, but also you are not exercising. So the risk of cardiovascular conditions increases. Now, when you are aiming at addressing or mitigating against climate change, you have a benefit of implementing strategies that will have what you can call cross-cutting benefits. Cross-cutting benefits. So you want people to, let us say, move to work on their foot. They exercise. You make sure that you have pedestrian lanes. As they're exercising, they are reducing the risk for cardiovascular conditions, but they are also not emitting fumes into the atmosphere. You have what we call core benefits, health core benefits of mitigation. So that is a concept that, as when you want to improve environmental health, or you are putting in measures to mitigate climate change, you're also getting health benefits. And that is the concept of health core benefits of mitigation. Adaptation strategies, I've already talked about them. I said it is focusing on reducing the impact of climate change. How do you live with the climate change issues? Okay, so diversification of livelihoods. If you are an agriculturalist, you have been rearing, let us say, animals, you can also engage in, let us say, poultry rearing, let us say, vegetable growing, okay? Such that if the weather is not suitable for vegetable growing, you will get your fish if you are engaged in fish farming. Such that you don't have one source of income, okay? This is why we are having a problem with the cattle raise. People are depending on cattle. That's their livelihood. But if you have someone engaged in vegetable growing, somebody engaged in beekeeping, okay, so they can actually live a sustainable life. Improving infrastructure and technology, irrigation, using climate resilient technology, this can actually help. Sustainable land management practices, soil conservation practices, reforestation, these are very important. Having early warning systems, the meteorological departments should be warning people. Okay, maybe we need to look at the meteorological department in South Sudan. How is the information about this season shared? Are people receiving this information? If you are going to have a long period of drought, are people being warned about this? Okay, capacity building and education. We need to educate communities and even ourselves, and that's why actually this is actually very important for us to have this discussion, because we could be the eyes to the communities and to the places of work. And one of the eye openers is what we talked about earlier on. Look around your workplace and see if are you using renewable energy? Are you managing the waste properly? Your offices, are they eco-friendly? Okay, you need to check that. To address the problem of climate change, it's a global problem and therefore requires global cooperation to really address it. We have a number of agreements, commitments that have happened on a global stage to address climate change. We have the Paris Agreement. This was for 2015. And then we had the conference that took place in UAE, in Dubai. It could have been, is it last year? I think. It's one of the key, it's the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Okay, where we have superpower countries and all other countries will be discussing issues to do with climate change. Okay. Issues to do with carbon trading, issues to do with funding, all of things. And we shall have a session on international response to climate change. What are these different agreements? Is South Sudan party to these agreements? Okay, and what is the agenda? Okay, currently climate change is on the top in terms of the global agenda. If you remember what we talked about in health policy, it's one of the hottest issues, that is climate change. Okay, so what are the international bodies doing? What agreements are there? What declarations are there? What commitments are there? We shall look at that. So this one, I think even our president attended this. I think mostly. If he did not attend, I think he must have sent a delegation. So this is also an eye-opener for you, by the way. It's such a delegation. There's such a conference that took place in Dubai. Even you as a student or as a health worker, you can really participate. Okay, it doesn't mean that it is the high-end people. This attracted a number of people, delegates across. Actually, this for Uganda there was a bit of a saga, because It was claimed that the Ugandan government sent 200 people for this conference in Dubai. So um, it was a hot political issue. How do you send 200 people for that, for such a thing, on taxpayers' money? But you can also go there privately as a private activist. So having given you the information that this is actually a topic that is high up there on the global agenda, you really need to empower yourself with information about it and what are the opportunities that are available for you. Okay? Climate change activists in South Sudan, their visibility, I can't see them. I've not seen them yet on the international scale. I can point to you that we have so and so who is a climate change activist, so and so. But when it comes to South Sudan, I can't. So where are you doing the activism from? So think about that and be part of such conferences when they happen. So that marks the end of this first presentation. And if you have any questions,